Great. Okay, I'd like to call to order the, I always have to check the date, Thursday, May 6th, 2021 Policy and Education Subcommittee meeting. Our first order of business is the approval of minutes from the March 11th, 2021 meeting. Anyone have any questions or comments about those minutes?
No, Madam Chair. I move that we accept as written.
Okay. Due to lack of other options, I'll second. We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Devon?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye, so those are approved. The next item on our agenda is a review and update of the 2021-22 school year calendar proposed revisions.
So I will take that as my cue. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. And so I just give you a heads up, after I go through item number 3, I am going to need to hop off. Mr. Lee will take you home. This item is on the agenda. We have, as you know, already passed a calendar for 21-22 school year. However, the calendar that was passed, we had some miscommunication, I will say, with the BEA, with the union. The contract is specific about the start of school as to when it must start, and it is I can't remember exactly what it is, but it is the first. If there's a first Tuesday or
first Wednesday in September.
In September, which is this year, as we know, before Labor Day. And then there also is language in the contract that says that the Friday before Labor Day will not be a school day. So we had put together a calendar that you approved, that I did communicate out to the BEA on a couple of different occasions, and we just didn't connect. So we passed a calendar that actually is not in agreement with the contract language. So I am coming back to you with a couple of different versions to share that are in alignment with the contract language. And just kind of briefly, as you know, we were not coming back to school with students or staff this week of the full week of the 30th. We were actually going to be coming back with staff on the 8th and students on the 9th. Part of this, the decision around this not going on the 7th is because it is Rosh Hashanah. The feeling was at that point too that, you know, with that being what would have been the first day of school, we didn't want to, after a pandemic coming into a regular school year, have students who had to miss school on the first day of school because they were observing Rosh Hashanah. So we had passed a calendar that avoided that. So this is one version of what we would like to propose to you. This has us actually bringing teachers in on Tuesday, the 31st for a workshop day. Then we would bring students in on the 1st and the 2nd. So the first day of school for students would be September 1, and then September 2 for the second day. Friday before Labor Day, which is contractual, would be a non-school day for everybody. This one contemplates continuing to take the 2 days off for Rosh Hashanah. Mr. Lee has done a lot of work with local religious leaders, including Rabbi, and we do get regular guidance from, I think it's in Hingham, the temple in Hingham, that puts it out to all South Shore superintendents. But generally the accepted, it would be okay. The majority of people observing the Jewish faith would observe it on the 7th, not necessarily the 8th. But when we thought that it was going to be the first day, we didn't want to get into that. So we took both these days off. This calendar maintains that. The second version of this, which I think now we should look at, actually takes the 7th off as the recognized day for Rosh Hashanah, and then brings students back in again and teachers on the 8th. But they would have already been in school for Wednesday the 1st and Thursday the 2nd. So it's not their first day of school, which is what we were really trying to avoid. I would recommend that this be brought forward to the full school committee for approval. And I'm just giving it to you for your consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Please.
thank you, and through the chair. So the second one we've just seen, and we've seen the difference. The main difference is the coming back to school the 8th versus the continued observance of the Jewish holiday. And we know that that's okay because we've reached out to the religious leaders. Am I correct in that assumption?
Correct. And because we're bringing the first student day would be Wednesday the 1st, we're not doing the first student day this
Right.
week. So they would have had 2 days of school and then the holiday break and then Rosh Hashanah. And then everyone once again back in on the 8th.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Could you remind me, have we observed Rosh Hashanah as a holiday before?
We have not.
Not in terms of taking the day off. I mean, we do have it as part of a policy in terms of what can be tested those days, or what kind of work can be assigned. But as far as taking days off, no.
Okay. So I personally am okay with moving this version of the calendar forward, as opposed to the other one. I think where we've had the blessing, so to speak, of the religious leader, that the one day is okay and it's no longer the first day of school, then rather than add, a 5-day break right at the beginning of the school year, I would propose that we move forward to the full committee, this version of the calendar.
Madam Chair, may I make that motion, please?
Please do.
So moved.
All right, I'll second it. Mr. Devon?
Aye.
And I also vote aye. So that is approved to move this version of the calendar that we're currently looking at for review by the full school committee on Monday.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. And I will stop off. Good luck with your next conversation.
Thank you.
See you in a bit.
Great. Okay, so our next item on the agenda relates to an online code of conduct policy for school committee members. This is something that we've taken a look at offline and brought some documentation for review at the meeting. Would you like me to share my screen, Mr. Lee? Is that easier?
Andrew's kind of driving, but I think it might be easier if you do it, if Andrew can give you permission.
Okay.
Sure. Should be okay now.
Great. Okay, can everyone see my Word document? So this is the packet that was shared to the members of the committee prior to this meeting. It includes a number of links to articles for review that talks about the use of social media by public officials. It also contains a copy of the town social media policy, our current BPS policy that we have passed and on the books, and then potentially relevant excerpts from other towns' policies. So I think if I could sum up the articles in a pretty simplistic and brief way, it's that we as a school committee have no jurisdiction over the use of personal social media by school committee members. There's a lot of precedent, there's a lot of documentation, and you'll see in these policies around the use of school sanctioned or school representative social media accounts and sort of what is said and not said there and how they're used, which makes a lot of sense. Contrary to, I think, what some people might believe, I don't believe, and the things that we've read here back up the fact that, someone's personal life does not become the subject of open exposure to anybody by virtue of the fact that you are in a town elected position. And so it is my belief as the chair that I'm bringing forward for discussion with the committee that we add some language to our current policy that helps to dictate what we believe should be the behavior around personal social media, and try to get at what we're looking for there. So the first policy that we have here, which again, hopefully you had a chance to review in your packet, is the town social media policy. Once again, all of the language here is about using town accounts and how you represent yourself there and the established behaviors around that. As I mentioned, we have a policy, IJNDD, website and social media policy, on the books for us that's more around students and staff. And again, it talks a lot about official BPS social media. So the fact that you can publish announcements, newsletters, notifications, so on and so forth. It gets into administrator responsibilities, educator responsibilities, and student responsibilities, and the expectation of professionalism and appropriate use from sort of all of the audiences that were previously mentioned. What I believe is relevant to our discussion here that I wanted to bring forth for committee consideration is some language that I saw in some other social media policies that I've noted here. And this, I believe, is language that we may borrow to talk about the use of personal social media in our own policy. So here's an excerpt. So due to the nature of social networking or social media sites, there exists a risk of misuse. Staff members should always be mindful of how they present themselves to the world, both online and otherwise. So I believe that this is relevant to our situation, and that we're asking people to be mindful of the fact that they are in a publicly elected position, even when they're on their personal social media. Again, we don't have any jurisdiction to dictate what people do in their personal social media, but I believe it's within our bounds to include language in our policy to talk about people being mindful of that.
I'm in agreement, Madam Chair.
Sorry?
I'm in agreement, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. The excerpt here is kind of interesting, and I wish I had highlighted, here we go, the relevant passage, which is around Facebook in particular. They give an example that you should take specific steps to privatize the information that you place online and educate yourself and familiarize yourself with the features around the social media site that you're using. So this talks about, any information intended to be private that becomes public through the member's own ignorance of the features. But again, this speaks to representing yourself as a member of an elected position. But once again, I think it's a good piece of food for thought for anybody on the school committee to familiarize themselves with the ways that you can lock down your account. As such, the next passage talks about anything that someone shares could be redistributed by any recipient without your knowledge or consent. Again, they're talking here about staff use, but I believe that this sort of reminder is useful in the context of personal information as well. This is actually a duplication of the same policy. This is from Wellesley. And here from Wellesley also, they have a passage that says the line between professional life and personal life must be clear at all times. Staff members should only use educational social media to communicate with students, parents, and guardians, and only on matters directly related to education. Again, not a perfect parallel to our situation, but a reminder that when you're representing yourself online, to be careful about that line between professional and personal. And then from Bridgewater Raynham, which I kind of got a kick out of because they cite Braintree as one of the sources for their policy. So it looked quite familiar. But they added this passage, which again, I thought was well said. However, due to the nature of social networking sites, there exists a risk without care and planning that the lines between one's professional and personal life could be blurred. So again, while it specifically relates to how you represent yourself as a staff member, it's a convenient reminder, I think, in our case that even though you may have locked down your account as well as you could, it's worth taking a look and being aware that not everyone that you're friends with online is truly your friend, and that they may use things that you've posted on social media against you, as we have witnessed. So I think it's a good reminder for people to take a look at locking their stuff down and always be mindful of the fact that if you post something, it could get out. So that is the references that I brought for consideration at this meeting. Mr. Devon, I guess I'll put you on the spot as the only other committee member here. If you have any thoughts or questions or discussion items.
Too funny. Madam Chair, thank you for singling me out and putting me on the spot. Look, it's kind of funny in that, look, each one of us as members of this committee have had situations that could have been handled differently, better, worse, whatever. I do think that, like any of our policies, they're kind of like living and breathing. And as we learn more about what social media is and all things that go with that, they'll constantly be updated. And what we have now is, not something that can readily be applied unless we want to take what the town has that was voted on by the council that's rather, shall we say, encompassing. And my thought is, okay, I don't mind looking at it, but I do believe being a self-governing body, we have to almost agree to these outlines rather than just making a precedent that what is determined by the council is binding to us if it's not something that's quote unquote within the charter. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The excerpts that you have from some of the others, Situate and Wellesley and Bridgewater, I think they're trying to get us there. Is it a perfect marriage? Probably not, because look, each and every town has its own, issues and/or problems. What constitutes a problem in Braintree might not constitute a problem in Bridgewater and so forth. But by us at least looking at how others are trying to attack this problem, and it's not just one problem, it's many problems. I think it's in our best interest to, shall we say, let this settle in a little bit, maybe come up with different ideas. And in our next meeting, shall we say, come up with something that's a little bit more substantive as to how it applies to Braintree. But one of the things I think is extremely important and paramount is the fact that as an elected official, your expectation of privacy disappears. And that's been upheld in courts of law throughout the land. And I think just knowing that, however it be frightening, and letting people know that, yes, and in spite of the fact it's frightening, it's one of those things we give up to serve the people. Is that a heavy price to pay? Maybe it is for some, maybe it isn't for others. It's not for me to say, but I think it's important that we let people know that your expectation of privacy disappears when you sit on this committee. Another thing is the fact that we are looked at, in spite of the fact we are not compensated, we are looked at by the town of Braintree as employees of the schools. So I think that in itself is another layer of us giving up something, certain, shall we say, I don't think rights are the right word, but knowing that there are certain things that employees of the town of Braintree must adhere to, because we are employees of the school department, we have to apply to those. Adhere to those also. Election rules. We can't use a copier through a school or something to that effect, and other things that we give up by being employees. So, I know I've gone through quite a lot here, and I'm sorry to take so much time, Madam Chair, but if we can just kind of make those highlights, I think that'll help set up, a channel or a lane we all should be able to adhere to. Does this help?
It does. I don't think I agree with that you must give up your personal privacy by virtue of the fact that you've been elected to the school committee. I believe, and that's why I included the passages that I did, that we don't have jurisdiction over what people do in their personal lives in terms of our policy. We do,
Right.
In terms of how they represent themselves as a member of the school committee. That line is really clear, and I think we agree on that. That's well documented.
And I think looking through the articles that have been presented, I mean, that loud and clear, what comes through is serving as an individual on a private, personally owned device, saying whatever you want to say is protected. And that the only recourse at that point is through a recall process within the town if you're an elected official. And although people might view the school committee members as employees, they're not. They're elected officials in that capacity. What I do think, to Ms. Dolan's point, is really important is to clearly identify for the individual members how you can actually blur the line between what you think is your personal social media page and make it a business page. And when you begin to include pieces of information related to your job as a school committee member, you've now blurred that line. And now all of a sudden we have to look at that differently. If you completely isolate it and treat it as your personal, posting pictures of your dog and sharing gossip in the neighborhood, that is protected under the First Amendment. And then it would be up to the electorate if they wanted to do something about it. If that line is blurred and we don't clearly communicate how not to blur those lines, that's where I think individual members could get themselves in trouble.
You said it far better than I did, Mr. Lee. I'm in agreement with the way you put that. And I think that's more in line with what you were saying, Madam Chair.
And I think Mr. Lee brings up a good point, which is not represented in these excerpts, which is including language about, don't talk about the fact that you're on school committee on your personal page. Don't post about your activities as a school committee member. Those are things that I think we can say that, to Mr. Lee's point, makes sure that those lines are not blurred, which seems important. So if we're in agreement with the general premise, what I could do prior to our next meeting is, take some of these excerpts and what we've talked about and try to work it into our existing policy. So the policy that we would end up reviewing as a committee, making comments and edits to as a committee, and then ultimately, when we feel it's in a good place, bringing to the bigger school committee would be a modification of that existing policy around website and social media use, rather than creating something new and separate.
The only, Madam Chair, I'm in agreement. The only caveat I think is, and at no point in time have I ever had an opinion where I thought we should stifle a person's First Amendment rights. Everyone has a right to say what they will, be it, shocking, objectionable, whatever. But to expect that you can hide from what you've said through your expectation of privacy. I do believe you have to look at the fact that you can look, and if it's a private thing and you want to have that sectioned off where it's only between you and a few friends, but if somebody isn't your friend and it gets out, your expectation of privacy therefore kicks in. And yes, you're able to say whatever you want, do your First Amendment rights. But if you think you can now privatize that, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. I think that's an important thing for people to understand. And I think it's a rule of law.
Well, and I think to clearly, within the policy that we're discussing, I think it's important to communicate to the general public what the roles and responsibilities of the school committee and the school administration, for that matter, are in matters like this. That there's a certain expectation out there in the general public that if they don't like something, you as a school committee can arbitrarily make a decision about an individual member. Or we even got a few where they expected the school administration to do something about it. And those things just aren't the way the process works. And somewhere within a policy to outline kind of what you're talking about, Mr. Devon, that, private isn't private in the sense that nobody can hear about it or have an opinion about it. Private in terms of what we're discussing is about consequence. And where is, to Ms. Dolan's point, our jurisdiction or your jurisdiction in these matters relative to when somebody is using their personal equipment, their personal page, running from their home on their own time, because neither group has jurisdiction in that moment, only the electorate does.
Well, haven't we seen that happen in a way?
So, but I think it's more about protecting the committee in the sense that I'm sure you've heard a lot about what people wanted you to do about something.
Oh, yeah.
And what you actually are able to do doesn't mesh with their expectations. And somehow articulating to them, here are the roles and responsibilities of the committee, it might just make it clear to people when they have a problem with an individual person's private posts, how they might be able to handle it that does not involve the committee.
Mhm.
Excellent. Yeah. From your lips to God's ears.
That's a great inclusion. And, to your point, Mr. Devon, there's risk inherent in using social media. And that's what we tell our children from the moment that, they're on it. You put something out there, it's out there forever. And you need to be aware of that and willing to deal with any consequences. But if we talk about the measures that we expect and hope that people will take on their personal social media, talk about the consequences and, that great point about not using your personal social media to talk about your public role, I feel as if, we have a fairly comprehensive yet legally defensible policy that helps to set some expectations.
And what the limitations for those things are too. Wow, yeah.
Okay. So if we're on board with that, again, I will take this back and make some edits to the existing policy that we can bring to the next meeting and collectively review, edit, comment, and so on until we're in a place where we're ready to bring it to the broader committee. Does that work for you, Mr. Devon?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay. We do not have any other MASC policies to review. I would say my policy time this week was spent on this particular policy. So before our next meeting, I can identify a few policies that we have not yet passed from the MASC boilerplate and bring those forth for us to take a look at.
Great.
Cool. All right. If no one has any questions, concerns, or other topics of interest, I think I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Madam Chair.
All right, I'll second it. Mr. Devon?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye. So we are adjourned and I will talk to you guys at 5:30.
See you in a
Thank
couple
you very
minutes.
much, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.